the mad scientist of data, Dean Croke from DAT IQ. And today we're going to talk about, yes, sir, we love it. And today we're going to talk about how you throw a rock on one side of the pond, how it ripples to the other side of the pond, and what the data tells us about how those ripples are going to impact us long term. To the Hpls podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly. I love that. DJ was the creator of that mad scientist. I love it. I think it's so cool. And Dean, you know what?
I love it. Yeah.
You are, and I know we every week. You are such an inspiration and such an asset to the industry and to the show. And I just want to thank you again, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be with you. I don't think I've ever been called mad and scientist in the one sentence. I've been called both. More mad than anything. So.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's today's interesting because good morning, Lisa. Today's going to be a great day because what we just for everybody watching and listening, I'll kind of set this up for you real quick. So what we decided to do is every week we decided to take one part of a supply chain and kind of get the data for it, how it's changed over the last couple of months, what we see happening in the future. So for all y'all watching and listening, all y'all that are members of Inception, all y'all that are in our communities, reach out to us. Let us know some areas of challenge for you. Some areas, and you know what, this actually started last week when we were talking about Texas to Canada, and then it was like, oh well, Texas to Canada, and all of a sudden, well, no, it's hazmat, you can only use drive-in. There was all these other little doodads that got thrown in the mix, and it helped, and it shed some light on a very important area. And so after the show, we all started talking. We said, what if we were to do this every week? And so that's kind of the method that's going to happen from now forward. So if there's anyone watching, listening, that you have specific areas, we are going to talk about Western Canada into the U.S. Yesterday, we had Greg Cornett on, and Greg talked about some of the challenges he had from his Western Canadian facilities into the U.S. So we figured it'd be a great start for that to talk about that, because if you're in that same boat, whether it's your customer out there, and I don't know if my toque is hindering my sound at all here, guys, but I feel it rubbing in my ear. If you're looking Western Canada to the US and you're having some issues with it, Dean pulled a bunch of data that we're going to talk about, and kind of when things started to fall off the cliff, where they are now, and what, because of something that happens in Canada, what happens overseas when that happens. So Dean, awesome. I'm so excited to dive in. So I guess the first thing people start thinking about with Western Canada was something that shocked me, was that when Western Canada has an issue, they actually cannot get French fries to Japan for McDonald's and stuff.
Who knew? Who knew the humble spud that comes out of Prince Edward Island and Idaho and is it Manitoba? I think they grow a lot of potatoes. I think
mainly PEI, but
PEI, PEI is the largest province in Canada for potato production. Of course, the US has banned the PEI potatoes because of a fungus that was found back in October in 2 fields. They banned all exports of PEI potatoes to the US. So I really feel for the farmers up there in PEI, because I was up there just before the harvest on vacation, and potatoes are the lifeblood of the island. That's what goes on there. It's such rich soil, other than lobsters and all the other seafood that goes on. But who knew that McDonald's being out of French fries in Japan, having a shortage in, I think it was December 21. I'll go back and look at my dates here. December 21, the news story was it was a dark day in Japan when McDonald's had to announce the decision to suspend sales of medium and large size French orders. And it turns out that a lot of the French fries in Japan are shipped via Canadian ports. So it's kind of a three-nation, connection. But month-long flooding, if you think back to the month-long flooding in November in British Columbia, that port, the ports around British Columbia, Vancouver in particular, Prince Rupert, a lot of the supply chains were shut down because they literally couldn't get trains, trucks in and out of that area. That's a pretty vital connection to the Trans-Pacific trade lane. Just geographically, you say to yourself, why does Prince Rupert have 4 train services every day from Prince Rupert to Chicago, right? And Prince Rupert's like just a phenomenal port. When I looked at Prince Rupert this morning here on the dock, they've got 7 working tracks, 18,000 feet, 6 storage tracks, on-dock focus, 6 gantry trains. They've got port calls from all the major ocean lines. It's about 1,200 kilometers closer to northern China, to Vancouver and Prince Rupert, than it is to Los Angeles. Which, when you think about the map of the world as we look at it one-dimensionally or even two-dimensionally, it doesn't sound right. But as the way the world is shaped, it's closer. So 1,200 kilometers is about a day's sailing closer for imports from Asia. So that's why a lot of that volume has ended up in the Pacific Northwest. So there's a great train service, lots of truckload capacity to move loads out of Prince Rupert to Chicago and Vancouver and Seattle. And of course, what's driven port volumes north is the congestion in Los Angeles. So, over the course of last year, a lot of that volume started to move north. And I started to figure, wow, if that's happening, then there's probably going to be some good truckload volumes come out of the Pacific Northwest, which turns out that's what's happened over time. But the connection here with the flag, and I'll get to the spot rates because, Dan, I looked at spot rates north-south, thinking that it was Vancouver, Los Angeles, Ontario, Stockton that might be impacted the most. Turns out it's not. It's Vancouver, Prince Rupert, Seattle to Chicago, where the rail lines have had problems because CN that runs, they've got a very important critical track that runs between Kamloops and Vancouver. That corridor was hit hard by floods. In December, in November, when it got
taken away.
I heard
it took them a long time to rebuild those lines, right? So what that does is when you start to break those supply chains in both directions, one of the modes that can pick up that slack, of course, is either air cargo or truckload. Trucks can go anywhere, although going up over the Coquihalla in December is problematic. But they can generally be much more flexible in terms of getting around things. And I remember when that storm was breaking, carriers were posting online all the different routes around that, right down into Washington State, around Yakima, up through Spokane, and then back onto the I-90. So what happened, of course, the story started when Ryan Peterson from Flexport said we're chartering 3 747s to send French fries to the French fry-starved Japanese McDonald's franchise. So everyone started to say, well, how does that happen? And at the same time, a friend of mine was sitting on a loading dock in northern Maine where they grow potatoes. And he was sitting there for 27 hours. And I said, dude, what's up? Why are you there for so long? And he said, they told me the load is urgent. This load of French fries from a processing plant. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And at the same time, this story broke about French fries. And I put 2 and 2 together and said, oh, okay, now I get it. But the problem was when you're a truckload carrier and you go deep into Presque Isle, Maine, they've got you by you know what. Where are you going to go?
Short and curly.
Load? Yeah, you got to wait. So he's sitting there. He's got a porta potty outside the yard. Not allowed to go in the warehouse. Nearest truck stop's 45 miles away. Like this stuff goes on quite a lot. Anyway, so the story sort of played out. And I thought, oh, okay. So now we've got a shortage of French fries everywhere, and then of course that's driving up spot rates there. But when I looked at the rates this morning, Dan, this is kind of amazing. When I looked at, so go back and think, okay, a lot of imports coming in from Asia. There was a drop-off. Remember, there was a lot of capacity in Seattle and Vancouver ports. There was a vessel that lost a lot of containers overboard in a fire. They had a very big vessel congestion issue, and container volumes plummeted in November and then took off in December. So there was kind of this backlog that built up, and then the floods hit, and then the ports were sort of choked up with congestion, couldn't move the volume, the rail lines were broken. So suddenly you had a lot of volume building up. So what's been happening over the course of the pandemic is as we've had these surging import volumes on a lot of intermodal lanes, the intermodal network hasn't been able to add more capacity. Truckload has picked up a lot more capacity on those lanes. So when I looked at truckload capacity on those lanes, and excuse me for looking down here, but I'll just look at the numbers that I pulled this morning. Prince Rupert to Chicago, right? So this is a major intermodal lane That's why Prince Rupert, the Port of Prince Rupert, has built this massive on-dock rail facility, goes from the ship straight to the train, straight to Chicago. And then the empties come back, go back to Asia. So rates were averaging up until the floods $1.43 per mile. Not fabulous spot rates for a carrier, but if you need to get out of the Pacific Northwest, which is a backhaul market, that will work. That will do. It's probably
and
below
it's very
cost.
typical for, it used to be very typical for low rates to be out of out of that area because it was really expensive to go back because rates were low.
And that's what's changed is spot rates. It used to be a heavy backhaul market and you could get truckload capacity at any number. But that's changed because there's more import volume coming in to avoid Los Angeles. So let's back to the story. $1.43 per mile was the average up until the floods. In November, from November to December when the floods happened, spot rates jumped to 88 cents a mile. Right?
Which 88 cents a mile from $1.43 is actually a decent rate. Like it's a fair rate to run a truck.
Right. And today it's up 90 cents a mile since then.
So 90 cents a mile since the 80 cents. So we're talking actually $1.70 a mile since November. It's gone up. Exactly.
So if I look at I take fuel out of it.
Goodness.
So 7-day rolling average rate. Yeah. So it's $3.62 this week, and that's up from $1.82 before the floods hit. So it's $3.62 excluding fuel. That's the line haul rate to move a dry van. Sorry, DJ, missed that?
I just said that's more than double what it was running at then.
Right, that's exactly my point. Now, out of Vancouver to Chicago, it's a similar story. It's even more fascinating. It was only $1.20 a mile as a long-term average. It doubled in December. It went up $1.25, and it's at $2.89 today. So it hasn't come down. And I think that's the point, is that the supply chain disruption and tight capacity has. And I'll quickly pull up in rate view. I'll pull up Vancouver to Chicago now. And remember, this is a key intermodal lane. Minus fuel, it's at $2.88 today. It was $2.89 in December. In December, it jumped from $1.64 to $2.90 in the space of 30 days when the floods hit.
Yeah.
So, and it hasn't come down.
Imagine if you're a producer out there that has to ship freight, right? Like, I mean, I think of what Greg was talking about yesterday. And so, Dean, I don't know if you saw the show yesterday, but we had Greg who has a facility out west, and he's saying it's taking 2 weeks to get his product to the border.
He said 3 weeks. 3 weeks, I thought.
3 weeks to kill.
He said 3 weeks.
Part of me says
trucks were taking and telling him it's taking 3 weeks. Well, there's why, because they're not getting good rates out there.
Well, and I'm wondering if the conversation, it's almost as if this is done backwards, because if we would have had this data, and then it would have been, okay, well, are you paying $2.90 a mile, or are you paying $1.80 a mile? Because if you're paying $1.80 a mile, that's why it's taking you 3 weeks to get there, because they're waiting until they don't have any other freight.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Capacity. So this has been the hallmark, or what's the word I'm looking for? This has been what the pandemic has told us, right? When you've got this tight supply chain, we use the analogy of this sort of rubber band, right? That's stretched to its limit. Doesn't take much for it to snap. And what we've seen throughout the last 18 months to 2 years is that, tight capacity market, but any little event has just completely upset things. You've got protests up there. It's affecting automotive supply chains in Canada. Spot rates are skyrocketing out of Laredo, where a lot of imports come in that go to Canada. You've got weather. We've got weather events here. We've got winter storms. We've got all sorts of things going on that's affecting the supply chain. So I don't know.
So Dean, can we talk about this for a second? Because here's the thing: is I look at the protests in Ottawa. Is Coutts, Alberta still locked down? Because I know Coutts, Alberta, the Coutts, Alberta crossing, protesters were not even letting trucks. And I saw a tweet from one guy that was a beef hauler, and he goes, "We got like 100 truckloads of beef sitting in line here. Like, this stuff has a shelf life. You guys got to let trucks through." And there was a lot of truckers taking to Twitter to try and get through. But here's a question that I have, and maybe you can shed some light on it for everyone. How do protests in Canada impact rates in the U.S.?
So it's a great question. we had Chuck Snow, CEO. I just love that's such Chuck Snow from Traffic, CEO of Traffics in Canada. I just love how he introduces himself on the show. Chuck Snow, CEO. It's got such a good ring to it. But anyway, he was on our live show 2 weeks ago, and I love Chuck. He's like a veteran of the industry, but he's got a great TMS product, and he's also been an owner operator and owns a small fleet. So he's got a very unique perspective on things. And on the show, he told us that you don't leave Canada with a truckload to go to the US unless you've got a load coming back already sitting on a loading dock. He said most of the firstly, most of the carriers that run cross-border back and forward are Canadian, right? So the majority of trucks are Canadian coming south. They go back north. So it's kind of like almost dedicated in a way. And a lot of it's contract. So it's not a lot of spot. It's mostly dedicated contract back and forward. Because if you're running into Canada, you've got to load back across the border out of the US. You can't do an intra-country move unless you go back empty. So if you have fewer drivers coming across the border south, naturally you'll have fewer trucks available to load north. And shippers have gone to the spot market. And I'll quote you something that we had a large truckload carrier tell us yesterday, a really big one. He said, on our asset side, we stopped sending our drivers to Canada in late January before the new protocols went in place. On our brokerage side, we are seeing Canadian capacity shrink somewhat this week, and we expect it to tighten as less carriers are willing to cross the border. So, and you heard the story this morning in Washington Post, or read the story, Washington Post talking about the impact on the auto industry through Detroit with the protests on the Ambassador Bridge. And of course, that's another automotive lane, like that's a heavy automotive lane. I'm seeing the same thing. Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing on rates out of Laredo, right? So Laredo is the largest border crossing for trucks from Mexico. I think on the show last week we mentioned that of the 65 auto manufacturers in Canada, they have 120 plants in Mexico. So you've got a lot of freight moving back and forward, and it's dedicated capacity. It's predictable. So when you disrupt that supply chain, spot rates take off. And I'll quote you some numbers if you want to go a little bit deeper. I call it Auto Alley.
I was going to ask you that.
Yeah.
Since obviously it's mostly dedicated contract, spot market has to went off the chain then. It had to
when you look at Auto Alley, right? So Auto Alley runs out of Laredo, San Antonio, a little bit east of Dallas, and runs all the way up through the center of the US into Detroit, or even into Toronto and other ports. So 7-day rolling average, Laredo, Montreal, let me look at Laredo, Toronto. So Laredo to Toronto is probably one of the busiest lanes in the dry van auto space for cross-border, up 30 cents a mile last week to $2 a mile. So for context, that $2 a mile doesn't sound like an incredibly high number for carriers in today's market. But rates on this lane were only averaging $1.39. So this is spot rates. They're only averaging $1.39 excluding fuel this time last year. And they only averaged $1.43 all of last year up until the protests, right? So since the protests,
and now they're at
they're currently 55 cents a mile higher than last year's entire average. So you see, so I think it's affecting certain lanes that are heavily dependent on balance capacity, because truckload carriers want the balance. They don't want to be running empty miles. They don't want to be sitting around waiting. So if you're a Canadian carrier that runs on, day a week, I think is critical for Canadian carriers, and our brokers sitting on this call will know that there are only certain days of the week where you can load sort of those Canadian carriers to keep on that weekly cycle. We leave Montreal Friday, we are in Phoenix, we're back, unload, reload, we're on this sort of cycle. When you break that cycle with just a handful of trucks, it doesn't take much. And it's interesting, I've been watching some of my friends on social media that run out of Nova Scotia into Baltimore and take machinery back. Haven't seen them south of the border in the last 2 weeks. So I think it'll hit a lot of those. See, Baltimore's a big market. When they shut down the St. Lawrence Seaway and take away the navigation buoys because it freezes up, a lot of your shipping lane, so that shipping lane kind of chokes up, and the volume will come to US ports, and then it'll be trucked north to Quebec or Canada or Montreal or Toronto.
See, there's something that a lot of people don't know, and I think that's another valid point to hit for all of you watching this, because what happens is when that St. Lawrence Seaway freezes up and it all goes to the US, that increases the truckload volume to Canada, which increases with lower capacity, that's going to increase costs as well. So some people are sitting there saying, how come I found a truck, 6 weeks ago and now I can't find a truck? There's no produce, there's no this, there's no that. And this is where data as a salesperson takes on a whole new meaning, because you understand, okay, what's happening in this market, and this is happening in this market at this time of the year.
And how's it going to affect
conversation, right? Because it has nothing to do with produce. It has nothing to do with chopped lettuce coming out of there. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's actually because the seaways freeze north of there, so the freight has to be rerouted somewhere else.
Yeah, I had a good friend of mine's chief officer on a vessel, and he comes out of the Baltic area. So he'll come out of, I think it's somewhere in the Baltic Sea. They do a route through. They'll go to Algeciras in near Rock of Gibraltar. They'll go to Tangiers, Northern Africa, and then they would go to Montreal, and then they'd sort of work down the east coast and then go back. And this is like a 5,000 TEU vessel. Well, of course, he's not doing Montreal. The Montreal part of that trip is no longer. So where does that freight land that would have normally went straight to Montreal? And of course, that's why you're seeing higher volumes. I know a lot of produce carriers that run across border out of Quebec. They'll hit the load boards around Philadelphia, because that's one of the biggest ports for import produce, whether it's Moroccan citrus or grapes from Chile. A lot of that comes into those ports, gets dropped on at Holt Logistics there, and then they just ship it out over the country. You're only you're only 8-9 hours to Toronto from Philadelphia. It's not a big. You can be there next day. Like, it's not a big deal. You get a good border crossing. You can haul that lane pretty easily. And there's a lot of carriers that run back and forward with dedicated capacity. And again, as soon as I think your analogy of the throwing the pond and the ripple effect, right, is a really good one. And I think if I was in broker sales, I think we said this on our call 3 or 4 weeks ago. What would you watch? And I said, watch the weather. I think it was on. I think we spoke about it. Like, the weather is really important this time of the year, because it will disrupt markets really easily. And that's why I've just watched the weather every single day, all day. And I think if I had one bit of advice, I would say widen your aperture, pull back from the lane and the market you're in, because there's a sort of a cause and effect. It's not just one market, one lane. What's happening in another market impacts what you're doing today, whether you're in Toronto trying to get a load to Calgary. What's impacting that is what, capacity coming into Calgary or coming out of Calgary. All those things play into it. And what you see, so last week, a small Midwest market, North Platte, Nebraska, right? It's east of Lincoln. I think it's I-80 or 70. It's a pretty busy lane east-west. And I thought, wow, why did spot market volumes jump 18%, spot rates jump 20 cents a mile in 1 week after dropping for 3 weeks prior? And I know shippers out there. Yeah, in North Platte. And when you look on Google Earth, so first thing I did was go to Google Earth and look at who's there. Yeah. Looked at all the businesses. So I know who's there, and I won't mention it on the call, but I know what was going on. But my first thought was weather. I wonder if they had a massive snowstorm and it just shut down everything. Well, I couldn't find anything. But my first thought was weather, because that'll impact a lot of freight rates, and it'll impact capacity, especially in this ELD era where you can't just catch up, with a paper log. Like, I don't know if people haven't driven trucks, you can't appreciate this, but I'll sit all day in a snowstorm if I've got a paper log. I'll just get there eventually and make it up, at the end of the week. It'll all look legal. You can't these days. And that's why I think we're seeing so much capacity impact from weather events, because truckers that sit are technically on duty unless they can go off duty. If they're moving in slow traffic more than 5 miles an hour, it triggers on-duty driving. So whenever you see weather impacting the average road speed of trucks along interstates, capacity shrinks. So,
hey, Lisa,
interesting. Lisa's saying had a lot of snow in Kansas and it impacted that area. Lisa also saying she actually had that question about why are freight rates in the Northeast spiking because of the thing. Ryan says, thank you, Dean, for that data that we pulled from the other day. Here's an interesting one from Jeff, and it's something I want to talk about. The convoy hitting the U.S. by the end of the month. What do you see Oh, hold on. Before we get there, because Ryan said that he had his first job as McDonald's. Can't imagine those fries would be shorter. There would be chaos. Well, there would if we were up here.
Yeah.
What do you see happening with this convoy in the U.S.?
This is like, I think every show I can do one double face plant. This is nuts. This is like the ridiculous thing I've ever seen. Why would you take a week off and lose $5,000 in like the opportunity cost of pulling a truck off the road for a week to drive to Washington is, easily $5,000. So that's what's going to cost these guys. Then you got all the other stuff on it. But why would you do that when spot rates are at record high levels and likely to turn against you eventually? I just don't get the psychology behind this. It's such to me, it's a non-event. Unfortunately, it will impact freight markets. I'm not a fan of convoys. I just don't think this is the right way to go about it. We're an essential service. You got to be very careful when you're an essential service to the community. You've got to be very careful about how you go about doing this, because as we said on our show 2 weeks ago, the protests in Ottawa will be fine until they turn against you, and people turn against them very quickly.
They've had some, people are burning Canadian flags. I'm like, are you guys friggin' kidding me? Come on. I understand a protest. Don't get me wrong. It's been a decade now where it's like, I got something to say. Let's say it. And I get it. And it spawned some great things. It spawned some great new legislation. It spawned some great opportunities.
Right.
But at some point, it's like, you talk to the president of TFI, the CEO of TFI, Transports Incorporated, and the largest Canadian carrier by miles, right? And he's saying, like, listen, all our U.S. drivers are vaccinated. I talked to friends of mine that have U.S. Canada drivers, and he goes, they're all vaccinated. Like, he goes, like, listen, it's the same thing. You want to travel, you got to get vaccinated. He goes, people might not like it. I mean, listen, don't get me wrong. Everybody it's to their opinion. I have friends that are firefighters. The entire firefighting community said, if you're not vaccinated, you lose your job. Police, you're not vaccinated, you lose your job. I have friends that are like, this is BS. And I go, I get it, but what are you going to do? You're going to lose your job? He goes, no, but it's just it's not fair. And I said, okay, I understand that. But just like the flu, you don't see polio today because you get vaccinated. Now, the thing is, you get vaccinated at an age where you don't know you have a say. You know what I mean? So it's one of these things that, unfortunately, we've hit something that we've never experienced before, ever. Yeah. And listen, we got to do what we got to do, and I've had, again, my firefighter buddies, my son's on a volunteer fire hall. People have walked away and said, I'm not interested. Okay. And that's, again, your personal deal. But you know what? Trucking companies, I spoke to a buddy of mine that owns one. He says, listen, if a driver came to me because he didn't want to get vaccinated, I'd figure something out for him to run Canada or something. Yeah, of course. Because we don't want to lose them.
Yeah. And this is Jeff raised a good, this is not about truckers. This has become a lightning rod for, all sorts of crazy messaging. Unfortunately, US truckers are going to get tied up in it. And I think that's a real shame. I would say to guys, and I've said this to guys, have a look in your rear vision mirror, because that's an autonomous truck right behind you, and it hasn't got a driver in it. And if you want to give technology another reason to take drivers out of trucks, keep doing this stuff, because it's coming, and it's coming fast at them. And it's coming fast at them because of things like this. This is not if I had a truck business, my first question to these guys is, who's hauling your freight that you're not hauling this week when you're protesting? Yeah. Because those shippers aren't coming back. And I think that's, and this is what Chuck Snow said. He said, so if all these trucks suddenly don't cross the border, capacity increases in Canada and rates drop. It's how supply and demand works. The reverse is happening in the US. Supply has dropped, capacity tightens, rates are going up. So this is the ripple effect, right, of throwing rocks around. I'm kind of perplexed that the guys in the US have sort of announced their routes, because guess what the DAT inspectors are doing? They've got level 1 inspections lined up on every single one of those routes. It's like, guys, have you learned nothing from? So I just think this will disrupt things. They will make some noise. I think the US folks will have learned. I think what is the lesson? What if what I think Jeff says, what ifs to lessen the impact. I think the US people have watched this very carefully, and they won't allow this to escalate at all. I'd be surprised if they even get close to the US Capitol or the White House. Very surprised.
Oh, really? Okay, that's very cool. That's good to know.
Well,
what
they
do you
had
think
protests in
what do
May,
you think
right?
they're going to do to diffuse it?
Just block them from going in.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So you think about the safety and security angle, right? This will be very, very tightly managed from a security perspective. So I think they may not stop them going. They'll certainly meter their access points and where they park, how close they get. The May Day presence in May 21, that protest, they were fairly orderly. I think the whole train, blasting their train horns was pretty annoying. It's got the Ottawa folks up in arms. They put a ban on people blasting their horns for 10 days, apparently, in the city of Ottawa. So, this. I hope it doesn't go ahead, because that's why you have industry associations. But it turns out that these aren't what they're protesting aren't the things that industry associations actually lobby for. It's all this other crazy stuff. So.
My son said something to me very interesting when we were stopping for lunch on our way up here. He says, Dad, he says, I get it. They want to protest about vaccine mandates and stuff. He goes, but what does Terry Fox have to do with it? And so what they've done in Ottawa is they're actually dressing Terry Fox up and like burning flags in front of Terry Fox, a Canadian icon who fought for cancer research, who was probably one of the biggest shifts globally in cancer, and that to me is the part that upsets me, is that listen, you want to protest for your right, you have every right to do that, but leave the monuments alone. Leave these things. These have nothing to do with it, and it's like just to get. And I don't know if it's, and again, in my opinion, is it just to get your 3 seconds of fame on the news or something, or you think it's going to get a point across? Because it's not. And, above and beyond the impact of freight rates, Dean, I think you said it. I think your definition of it, hey, listen, who else is going to haul that freight? And if it's a rogue driver deciding to go, but if you're a company that says I'm going to go, your customers count on you more than ever right now. Like
now,
they count
right
on
now,
you to make things happen. And if you just decide to go off on some highfalutin thing, because and here's the thing, in the US, I'm hearing a lot of things like a lot of drivers in the US, they're going to do their own. Half of them don't. 3/4 of them don't even cross the border. So the vaccine mandate has nothing to do with them. It's just like, I'm just going to jump on.
Nuts.
Like we had a big protest for dump truck drivers. Right. That said, like, listen, we build roads, we build schools, we build these things, and you guys don't pay attention to it. And I think that was valid, because it was like they were getting dirt cheap rates, and it raised that bar. And I said, okay, you deserve to make an income, and it's, I don't know. I mean, I can go on forever, and I know we're over time, but whatever.
Well, Jeff makes a good point about truckers taking their wheels off. That's just utter madness, like that. Again, who's hauling your freight while you're sitting there protesting and belly aching about stuff you shouldn't be worried about? Like, these are times you need to be making money, because rates will fall, and the margins will be compressed. Diesel's pretty high. They've got to be very careful about this. And the other angle is, remember we talked about on our show a few months ago, make sure you stick with shippers that have got good memories. Well, because you want them to remember how tight capacity is. They will remember who they were abandoned by. And I've already seen the newsletters coming out from large truckload carriers in the US and in Canada saying to their shippers, if your freight's stranded, give us a call. So
salespeople are using it
demand.
left, right, and center, 100%.
Supply and demand.
And it's part of even email templates. I've seen dozens of them. Hey, your freight's stranded. Let's talk. And people's freight is stranded everywhere. It's a great in. Just
your business will go right past you while you're pulled over protesting. Your business will go right past you. It's to me, it doesn't make economic sense. There are better ways to do this, but protesting and driving to Washington, that's nuts. That's not the way. I was involved in a protest years ago in Australia, and we blocked all the highways, right? And it achieved very, very little. And we became the enemy within 7 days. And the industry never recovered. So there's a way to go about this. This isn't the way, and but majority of people don't support this. Even your surveys in Canada say that most people don't support this. So it'll be the same here.
No, I mean, I can't see any shipper that has volume that's already freight has already gone up, doubled and tripled, supporting less capacity, so freight rates can go up even more. Also, it's going to take me 6 weeks to get my freight where I need it to go, and then it's going to take me 14 weeks instead of 4 weeks on ship. So now I'm up, now I'm up 20 weeks to get my freight what I used to get done in 7. Like it's it's crazy. DJ, what do you got to take us out of here today, brother?
It is crazy. Hey guys, so Dean, thank you again, obviously, for joining us. All the great info. Ryan, you would. Yeah. Like and subscribe below. If to follow us, you can see us on Sales Chatter Live. If you missed this episode, we have the mad scientist of logistics data, Dean, every Wednesday. So if you want to know what's going on, make sure to catch us.
Thank you, Jeff.
I decided to go away from data today and go with a quote that I just loved. Eleanor Roosevelt: "The future belongs to those who believe in their beauty of their dreams."
Yes. Love it. Great to be with you.
Welcome to the Hpls podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.